Hello, welcome back. My name is Faith Jacobs, and you're listening to Coffee Break. Today, I'm going to be interviewing two amazing guests, Miss Jessica Scott Whyte and Jack Moorby, for a little book called The Asparagus Bunch. And Jessica, maybe you can start us off before we jump into questions, and you can tell us a little bit about the book and what the book is about.
Well, hello, thank you very much, Faith, I certainly will. So The Asparagus Bunch is a middle grade book, mainly targeted towards 11 plus readers, I'd say. It is set in a town in the UK called Blackpool, specifically in the north-west of England, and it is told from the point of view of 13-year-old Leon, who we understand from the beginning of the book has an attitude problem. He would describe it that himself, that most people he comes into contact with assume he has an attitude problem. He's been moved on from many different schools. He wouldn't be someone with a lot of friends per se, and that's sort of at the beginning of the story. And of course, as the story develops and unfolds, we get to learn a lot more about Leon and about his so-called attitude problem, if I can describe it as such. And it is a contemporary comedy, and quite a spiky comedy, I would say, at that.
I did listen. Unfortunately, I was not able to purchase either the book or the audiobook just yet, although I did listen to the sample that has been put out there by Audible, and at some point, I'm sure once the book goes, because I'm assuming it's only in UK stores right now. Like there are places online I saw that will ship to the States, but it's not international yet. I'm guessing, at least.
Yeah,
minus the Audible.
I mean, it's been rolled out in the UK and Ireland specifically, and of course Australia and I believe New Zealand.
Oh, nice.
But I have not yet got a US deal for the book.
Right.
Again, it's quite a controversial, quite a spiky comedy. So,
I mean,
I'd be very surprised if the US were prepared.
No, I mean, like if I have to purchase the Audible book, which is probably the closest thing, given that Audible is so widespread as far as regions and stuff is considered. I'll be very, very excited to listen to it, because the sample I heard, Jack, that was phenomenal. I've told you, I'll sing your praises.
Please do. I'm not complaining. If you can't purchase it, just ring me up and I'll read the book to you. Just set aside 7 hours and I'll.
Please do. I'll take it. Again, I enjoyed what I heard, and I'll be very excited too. Now, it kept rejecting like my card, and so like at some point, I plan on getting it. Somehow, some way, I will move heaven and hell to do so. But let's maybe jump into the questions. And so this one is more for you, Jessica. But Jack, you're very much welcome to jump in.
Yes.
If you feel you would like to, you can add something to it. So my first question is, in jumping at writing a character on the autism spectrum, did you have any fear or hesitation based upon past reactions to those kinds of characters in modern, based upon like what modern media has really done with them? And I'm thinking stuff like Atypical, or There She Goes, or like, not that There She Goes is autistic, but like disability media tends to have a negative connotation to it, is what I'm getting at.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's always, I think, something that is really expected of writers nowadays, particularly from the publishing industry, and this goes for really any issues book or book where maybe there is some form of representation. There is an expectation on behalf of the industry that writers question themselves prior and ask themselves the question, number one, why am I writing this story? And number two, am I the right person to be writing or telling this story. So that was sort of one thing. And then the second thing, of course, was not only was I, writing this story with a cast of neurodiverse characters, but also I was making a comedy out of it, and a dark comedy, which certainly isn't to everyone's taste. Not everyone may think that is, I wouldn't even say acceptable, but just the right approach. So absolutely, yes, those were things that did cross my mind. But well, I've done it. So
no,
it
it's
didn't stop
honestly.
that. But yes, of course, it's and even today, it's now out there in the big bad world, and it's certainly not for everyone. And I do appreciate that. But I'm a staunch believer in democracy and people having the right to their opinions once it's expressed in a respectful way. I've not gone after anyone myself, so I appreciate if it's not for everyone, this book.
Yeah, and I've seen some incredibly positive reviews from it. I haven't myself, being on the spectrum and having consumed so much of the media that's in there. I myself saw some problems. Not, I think, because it was a disabled or a neurodivergent writer at the helm, but because it was a more neurotypical viewpoint. And I tend to find that if you can often tell when there's not somebody who's neurodivergent on the writing team, because it will have a very, I hate to use the word offensive, because, but it just doesn't feel authentic. That's a better word. It doesn't feel authentic. This very much felt incredibly authentic and even charming.
Oh, well, thank you. But I mean, in all transparency with that, so in my circumstance, I live in a neurodivergent family. So I have a child, I have two children. One of my children, my eldest, has ASD. And I myself, I'm not, I guess, stamp on a piece of paper diagnosed, but it is a process that I'm seeking out. But that was always very clear and transparent from the beginning. And as I said, I know you haven't read the book, but one of the kind of key factors in the book, or sort of the key plot structures, is the main character Leon's relationship with his mother, Caroline. And again, this has not been to everyone's taste. There's so much, as you both who are on Twitter and indeed on social media in general know, it can get very fiery very quickly, and there's an awful lot of opinions often about what is acceptable, what is not, how much nuance can we have on these things. Again, I'm open to all of those conversations once it's taken, the approach is taken in a constructive way and not in a hurtful way, because we're in the business of writing and writing for children. And I, for me, I, as a mum, first and foremost, with my eldest, and the whole process of getting that diagnosis and going through all of that, was you find yourself very quickly, first of all, obviously through all those meetings, you often meet other families, other parents, other children, certainly, with the similar diagnosis or the same diagnosis. And one of the things I found, again, this is a bit of a controversial opinion, maybe it's not going to be for everyone, but I found that I was sort of at times thrust into kind of groups with other parents, and a lot of the time it was quite elitist. It was almost this sort of like, well, you're in this thing now, and it's all very serious, and almost you couldn't joke about anything. Everything had to be very, very serious all the time. And this, of course, there are difficult moments, of course, on a day-to-day with people with spectrum disorders. Absolutely, and I live it every single day, every minute of my life, through my child. And just there was a part of me that just thought, oh God, you know what? I just really hope that my child can also realize that, there's stuff that you can take from all of this, and through humor see things in a different light. It's not to make fun or to mock, but it's just to see circumstances through a different light, such as the relationship that often can happen through a parent and a child with ASD. All relationships are different. It depends on so many different factors. But our relationship is very like. Of course, I took it straight from the heart. What came out onto the page with Leon and Caroline, and our entire passages there, where it's just like, oh yeah, that's the day to day.
It's funny. It's funny you mentioned that. You mentioned being in a neurodivergent household, because my next question for you was in the excerpt I had read, you had mentioned bringing in your own personal experience.
Yes.
And I was going to ask how does that impact the authenticity of representation versus what I was saying, versus someone who might passively witness what we go through. And there is a second part to that, which is it difficult or easy for you to write from those experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can take another example to the book as well, because one of the main characters, this is not Leon, this is another very important character in the book, whose name is Tanya. She is dyslexic. So when I was growing up, I am not dyslexic myself. My mother and my brother are dyslexic, and my brother was diagnosed, I have one brother younger than me by 7 years. So when he was diagnosed quite young. He's quite severely dyslexic, and he was diagnosed, I believe, around the age of 6. So I would have been around 13. And I remember, obviously living under the same roof and very close to my brother, seeing that whole process pan out from my parents, and particularly my mum, noting that there was something clearly wrong, something was amiss, school was not going well at all, he was really in a bad way in school, and getting that diagnosis. And then from there, the whole ups and downs of that whole process, because luckily for my brother, and that's a huge, as we know, with any sort of diagnosis like this, early intervention is so important, and having a supportive network around you is huge. And so and one of the things that actually, even from my brother's experience, really always stuck with me was, I remember, he'd have friends home from school. He was he's a very sociable guy, and he'd have lots of friends, and they'd come home in after school. They'd be young kids, maybe at the time he would have been around 8 or something like that, 9, and in the early teens. And he'd always have friends over after school and stuff. And I'd often listen. It always fascinated me how they would interact with each other, and kind of, as we say in the sort of UK or Irish way, sort of take the mick out of each other, which means just like, making fun. And so often I'd hear my brother, like, they'd be like, talking about something, and my brother would make some mistake linked with his, letter sequencing or something like that, and his friends would make fun of him and be like, oh, you're so stupid, and he'd be like, yeah, I'm dyslexic, it's normal, and it'd be this sort of really kind of banter. Now, it never really went, I don't think, anyway, further, and maybe there were kind of a few times where it clearly was a bit too much. But that's what young people do. I mean, it's part of the banter of friends in a way, and sometimes it can be a bit. You listen and you think, that's not nice at all what you just said there, but it's very part of that dynamic. And I really wanted to incorporate that into the relationship with the 3 characters, because I think, once again, there are lots of, certainly now we see more and more, and that's fantastic, all kinds of books being produced now for younger readers with good representation in them. And absolutely. I also think you need, like with everything, you need a representation to its fullest. It's no longer good enough to just say, well, we have a book with someone who is autistic. There's all kinds of different autistic profiles, or indeed people with dyslexia. It affects people in different ways. But I also think, you can have quiet, gentle books. You can have very, very wholesome, positive books. And I do argue the case, I hope, that there is a little space for my book. As I said, it might be very niche, but it's for those kids that, may have these diagnoses, but may also be just, I'm like a kid like everyone else. I can make fun, I can live my life. It's just, it's even a way of kind of just dealing with it and getting on, is seeing that side to things. But that's, again, it's purely a risk, and I appreciate, you'll hear this a lot during this podcast.
No, it's okay.
It's acceptable that it's not for everyone.
No, I think it's wonderful that you're choosing to be a little bit more realistic. I remember my one promise with Chaotic Idiots and Tirnanak was the characters of Jacob and Edgar are autistic, and I have my character's whole family is neurodivergent. His dad has ADHD, his uncle has savant syndrome, his mother might even have a little, it's entirely a neurodivergent family. And my promise was everything else in Chaotic Idiots and Tirnanak will be fantastical and fictional, because it's a fantasy world of fae and magic and all kinds of things that you wouldn't hear in a real world setting. But disability and relationships will always be be as realistic as they can be.
Yeah.
It might not always be what you expect in a fantasy world, but it's...
Yeah.
I would rather be respectful than make up a bunch of rules for things that, you know...
And the...
disrespectful.
And then the other thing, I mean... No, I absolutely agree. But then, and then the other element, which I hadn't mentioned before, because it sort of started on my daughter, but also my husband is ASD, and he has an awful lot of Leon in him. An awful lot. So there was an awful lot also of him in it. I'm fiercely private about, of course, my family and about them, and I don't feel it in any way necessary to talk about them as in social media. I don't kind of go on, just simply because I didn't write a memoir, I didn't write a non-fiction book. I don't want to. It's not my story to tell on their behalf, etc.
Yeah.
But as like, for example, Leon, you've probably seen from the extracts and things, he has a really kind of consuming interest for the world of confectionery, and my husband has, to the exact degree, I am not exaggerating one iota, it's not confectionery, but it's another subject, but it is to ridiculous extremes. Like,
I have been there. I've been there. I've felt that.
But it's, you know, and there are days where, you know, it's fantastic and it's great, and there are just other days you're like, oh my god, I'm literally going to scratch my eyes out. Please, I beg you, anything but that, please. And but you see, again, like even you know, in our house we have a. We have a little sort of a framed picture beside the hall, and it's just a little sentence, and it just says, you know, if anyone asks, we're a completely normal family. And we are. We're a completely normal family, but most of the time, like, you know, it's just completely bonkers. But it's just great because, you know, sometimes I'm the odd one out at times because, you know, I miss a trip with people or vice versa. But anyway, so yeah, it's just to round off what I initially started it.
This next question I'm gonna throw to Jack, and it's quite a big one, but it's more.
I didn't sign up for this. What's the meaning of life? Oh,
you're a delight. It's kind of more in regards to into acting, and it does relate to the Asparagus bunch in a way, and I'll explain how. So in more modern times, there's been a call for having actually autistic voices at the forefront, and while some say that the call for authentic representation is a good move, some feel it might pigeonhole neurodivergent actors, basically meaning you can only play somebody who's autistic or has ADHD or is disabled in some way similar to you and nothing else. However, having been the voice of two characters who fall on the autism spectrum, do you feel as being neurodivergent has pigeonholed you in some way? Is it limiting your capacity, your capabilities as an actor as compared to maybe other roles you've done?
First of all, I do think it's really important for to make it a priority to hire actors who have who share either a disability or whatever the character is going through. I just think it's so important for representation and also for empathy as well. I know of an actor who had a sight impediment, but you couldn't tell at all, and he could see fine. He could still see, but he had this impediment. And yet he got a role that required that exact disability. And even though you couldn't tell, it was just important that he was involved. I do think it's incredibly important for those reasons of empathy, but also, I do kind of feel like, well, for a start, I have not really been too upfront about my neurodiversity since pretty much a year ago, the end of drama school, because I was auditioning for a role that was autistic. Right. So when I applied for that role, I disclosed that, and that's what got me in the door initially. And Yeah, and ever since I graduated, it's always been something. Whenever I've got a professional acting gig, it's something to do with me disclosing neurodivergence has got me through the door. I've only been in professional acting for a year, so out of drama school. But the things I have had. I've had an association with neurodiversity, so I do feel like it has put me slightly in a box. It's a box that I'm fine with, I'm grateful for all these opportunities. I've loved everything I've been involved in.
And I think you're good. I mean,
thank you.
Like, when I first met you, to interject just something that, when I don't think I would have even, I hate that it's such a stereotypical phrase that, I wouldn't even know when I met you, but truly with you, I don't think I would have.
No.
And I don't think it was because, even though your profile said neurodivergent, and I read that, what got me invested in you as an actor, I think, was witnessing what you did in, as brief as scene as it was, in On the Shores of the Wide World, which I watched you in 2021.
Thank you. Yeah,
you had such a presence on that stage, even though I wasn't physically there to see that, but I could just feel, I don't know, there was something about you that just took center stage for me. And the way you craft performances, I've seen you do it with Edgar, I've listened to you do it with, some of the little independent, short films that you've done, you're incredible to listen to and to watch, and you're just fun. And I think it was your monologue you did that got me going, wow, he's actually really good. And my first thought was, this is who I want to have voice my character. You already had my interest, you already had hooked me with your skill. And so, at least, maybe it's just me, but I definitely would say that you're hireable for a variety of roles, I feel, not just because you're neurodivergent.
Oh, thank you. Keep going. Keep them coming.
You are very welcome, and I mean it. I really mean it, Jack.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, yeah.
Trying to think. Okay, and the second question for you is, as the Asparagus Bunch is an audiobook versus an audio drama, yet still very much an acting performance, first off, was there anything in reading for Leon that you maybe saw yourself in, in the character? And what was the process of taking what's there and bringing it to life with your voice by comparison to the stage work you've done?
Oh, there's so much I saw in the book that I saw in myself, and also in other people close friends who I've had who are autistic and who are also dyslexic. For example, I think there's a lot about the relationship with Leon and Caroline that I really identified with myself and my mum, who is loving the book, by the way, Jessica.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. And I also, definitely for me, is the food intolerances. That's definitely something I identified with, and a really difficult chapter to record because it was just before lunchtime in the recording, was that awful scene where, no, not awful, it's brilliant, but that awful bit where Leon is... this isn't really a spoiler, but he's sat down for dinner, and the two of the characters who he's sat down with are eating baked beans. And baked beans are basically my kryptonite.
Oh no!
Yeah, much like Leon. So I even said to my friends recently, I work in customer service at the moment, and I even said to my friends who I work with, look guys, if you want to kill me, and if you can't afford poison, you just need to use some baked beans.
Oh
no! Yeah, but there were so many things that I identified with. I loved the passions as well. I really enjoyed reading Lawrence as well when he was talking about it.
All the Southern Jackets, just a scene out of Doctor Who where he goes, baked beans are terrible. He takes them and he chucks them out chucks them down the drain.
Yes, that's me basically. That's me.
But that's so. How? I guess I'll just throw this in here. I have heard that like when it comes to doing like audiobook work, like it can be pretty taxing. But so how was that for you? Like by comparison of like what you and I have done with the script.
I will say that doing this is my first audiobook, and I've loved it. But it's quite intense because this was recorded in. It's nearly 7 hours long, and it was recorded in 2 days.
Wow.
It was my I couldn't believe it. Thankfully, in the recording, I've been skimming through the recording just to think about what I could do differently next time. But thankfully, you can't quite tell just how hoarse I was during that time. So we'd record a chapter, and then my director would just radio through to say, "You good to do the next one?" And I was there like, "Yeah, I'm good."
This is what. Okay, Faith says Jack tea, lots and lots and lots of tea.
Yes.
Herbals, nothing caffeinated. Herbals.
Yes, I'll keep that in mind next time because I was.
Mode on you.
Yes, because I was just drinking so much water in between takes. But then, but I don't know. You've got to then you place your voice in a certain way that's. I suppose it's quite similar to where I place a voice when I do something on stage or.
That's true.
Yeah, you put it in a certain register where you can't really. The hoarseness disappears, but then you talk normally, and it's like. Yeah, that was fine. I'm just gonna nip out for a bit.
Yeah. Next question I'm gonna throw back to Jessica.
Sure.
So when I was reading in the excerpt, Leon comes across incredibly blunt and very honest. Yet by comparison of, say, I'm gonna I don't know if you're aware of like Atypical, the Netflix original series Atypical.
No, I probably should now.
Oh, it looks good. That I need to watch it.
I mean, again, like to each their own. Like you may find that you relate more to it, Jack. But it was kind of the TV show that I wanted to like. But I think it irked me a little bit in some places, particularly with the family dynamic. But like that was my experience with it, and
okay.
But that was just me. Like, don't let that dissuade you. I would definitely say watch it. You may find that you might relate to it more.
Sure.
At no point from my experience did I find that Leon's bluntness was offensive or off-putting. It wasn't distasteful. It was simply authentically and wonderfully Leon. And I actually found myself relating to that honesty because we have been there. We probably us ourselves have been probably a little bit too honest with somebody at one point and said something so off the cuff that we're like, oh no. And so my question in that is, I'm wondering, how difficult was it to really bring out the endearing charm and wit in the story versus I've kind of seen other writers fail at that regard to the aspect of autistic culture, which is we are more honest. We're completely honest to the point that it comes across, I hear the rhetoric I hear is, oh, you're so rude, when it's not intentionally us trying to be rude or blunt or mean, but it unfortunately can sometimes come across that way.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Well, again, I think it just comes down to, again, that sort of lived experience of just day in, day out, having all these conversations over kitchen tables and having humdingers thrown back at you and not, just as part of regular conversation. This is like I probably shouldn't be saying it, but it's like a classic moment with my husband in this instance. A number of years ago, he was visiting my parents. I think it was one of the first visits he'd made to our house years ago. Like, we are married a while, and he had sat down for dinner, and you know, my husband's French, so of course there are certain rituals around food, particularly like, you know, cheese and things like that. There's you know, quite proud of, you know, their culinary sort of greatness in the country, which I fully appreciate and respect. Anyway, and I'm Irish, so, you know, we were in Dublin. My mum's really kind of keen on cooking and all that kind of thing, and she made a big effort, you know, cooked a big slap up meal and everything, and then she brought out, I had told her that he particularly liked Comté cheese, which is a specific cheese, and you know, there's different aging processes. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but there's, like, you know, you can buy cheese that's aged a certain amount of months and blah blah blah. So my mum had gone all the way to, like, this very, you know, fancy cheesemongers in Dublin, and probably cost her, like, you know, I don't know how much, and got my husband, well, at the time my boyfriend, this, you know, whatever piece of cheese, blah blah blah, and she was really proud to be like, oh look, I've got you this, and Jessica told me that you specifically like this cheese, you specifically like that it's aged this amount of time. Well, my husband said, where was this before you served it? And my mum didn't understand. She was like, what do you mean? And he says, well, like, did you have it outside? Did you have it in the fridge? Like, where? And she said, oh no, I didn't have it in the fridge. I just, like, had it out for a while. And she's like, how long ago was that? And she's like, oh, I don't know, maybe like a couple of hours. Like, no, I don't want any, thanks. It was just like, shut door. It was, my mum was like, what? And I'm not kidding, like, that's where it ended. There was not even like, oh, I'll just try a bit. And I remember just, like, we still talk about it, like the famous Cheesegate moment. It's like, you couldn't have just seen my face and been like, just take some. Oh my god.
I will tell you,
but
like,
Sorry,
I have a kind of a story like that myself too. When I was in middle school, I was part of this home economics class, and they had made the meal of the day, I think, was veal. It was lamb of some kind. And I remember quietly going over to my teacher and being like, no thank you, I had a big lunch. And I literally started sitting down and pulling out all this massive thing I had packed, because I did not want to. I did not want to engage in the veal. I was not interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was the way I said it that it was, like, very kind of like that very autistic way of being just very honest and straight to the point. It's like, yeah, no thanks.
No, of course, but again, I think you know, in particular, for us, obviously, having then a child who was then diagnosed was a huge thing, because, you know, obviously when you're later to maybe being diagnosed, a lot of, I mean, every case is different, but in the case of, say, you know, my husband, it wasn't something that was a sort of from you know, early childhood or anything, you know, it wasn't, nothing was picked up or anything like that, so it was a different road. And obviously, you know, when you then see someone, you know, diagnosed quite young, I would say, you know, all of a sudden you have a different perspective on things, you see things in a different way, you're very, very involved, because obviously with younger people and kids, it's an absolute, like, dependency at that stage in life, you know, so you see things very, very up close, and I hope as best I can that has somehow been transferred through in the right way.
Absolutely.
Because it as Jack mentioned, reading a chapter about the baked beans was difficult, and there were certainly moments writing that book where it was, you know, you had to sort of, you know, take a big deep breath, and then, you know, especially, like, I'd be writing passages and I'd have, like, a knock on the door, and it'd be my kid saying, Mom, what are you doing in there? What are you doing, Mom? And I'm just like, oh, what do you do?
It's funny you mentioned, like, the diagnosis and you having a child who got a diagnosis, because when I mean, when I got mine, it was very late in the game for me. I was not diagnosed until about, goodness me, I want to say maybe like 7 years ago at this point for me. But looking back on videos and stuff of myself as a child, the signs were so obvious, but I was growing up in the late 90s. And at that point, autism had just really started to, autism and ADHD had just started getting traction. So I had none, everything that I see now, and I'm jumping at now, you know, even my self-advocacy, like, is so new, you know, so I think it's good that early intervention happened, but it definitely, I think it made it harder for me to even relate to some of the stories that some of these people on the spectrum would talk about, because that wasn't my case. I grew up thinking I was neurotypical for so many years.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's definitely, it's good to hear that. I am an advocate for that as well. Early intervention as much as possible, and then services and supports.
Right. Agreed.
Next question I'm going to throw, and we've been talking a little bit about the relationship between Leon and Caroline, and I what I noted was I loved how caring she was. And the reason why is because I feel like a lot of disability and neurodivergent stories, particularly when it comes to the family aspect or the family dynamic, which was my problem with Atypical. And not that I don't think that it's tough, but it's often dysfunctional, or the writing tends to showcase the kid like they're a burden. And I can think of so many other examples. I feel like There She Goes kind of does that too a little bit, even though I've been watching that show, and I think I appreciate what it did, because it's very raw and it's very realistic, and I think it too is a little bit of a dark comedy in that way. But like, I appreciate that you were able to sum up how much you really cared for Leon. And I'm curious if you looked at any of like the modern like media or examples of what, not obviously you're pulling from experience, but like did you sort of look at some of the things that are out there and go, oh boy, we should do something about this there's almost myth about the parental interactions between an autistic child and their parents.
Yeah, again, I think what I really hope, what I tried to achieve, well, it was very important for me, first and foremost, to have, I mean, it worked in this instance because of the story, but it was from the very beginning something that I had very much in mind, was to have two characters who had the same diagnosis, if I can say it like that, of course, having an autism diagnosis, but who are, in fact, Jack will certainly vouch, very different, and it's really to sort of highlight that not every case is different, or every case is the same. Naturally, everybody is different by default, but also so much, I believe, this is again a personal viewpoint, is impacted by, again, was there an early intervention or not? Have you had a good support network around you or not? Where are you brought up? Who has raised you? What kind of life instances have impacted, your path, etc., etc. And for example, with Leon, Leon is a very spoiled child. Like, I mean, I'm not going to beat it around the bush. I mean, there's a lot to him. I mean, his mum is a single parent. He has no siblings. It's just been him and his mum. And diagnosis or no diagnosis, I mean, if Leon had been totally neurotypical, irrespective, there are elements to his character that are also part of how he's been raised. Caroline, his mum, is extremely lovely, but in all honesty, she's quite bohemian. I would sort of see her as a bit, as we say in Ireland, a bit away with the fairies. She's a bit like, oh yeah, square is fine, she's not like, and whereas Lawrence, the other boy in the story, he's a very different character to Leon, and even his mum is very different to Caroline. She's much more strict, she's much more domineering, very protective, extremely like claws on him, it's a totally different setup. So that was really important for me to sort of highlight not only different characters with the same diagnosis, but also to not make their diagnosis the sole factor in their character. There's an awful lot to Leon, Tanya and Lawrence that has nothing to do with just their diagnosis. It's also who they are as people and what they've encountered in life. Like Tanya, for example, Tanya's been such a crutch to Leon because she's got a lot of emotional maturity. She's been through a lot in her life in different ways, whether it's the fact that her mum was a single mum and now she's had a boyfriend. So Tanya's gone through that, accepting someone into the home that's not her parent and making the best of it. Also struggling through school with her dyslexia and getting help with that, and that was very important in Leon, without spoiling, a lot of that also impacts Leon on the family front. So yeah, it was important to strike, I guess, that balance.
Yeah. Well, give me 1 minute. I'm going to mute myself. The recording's still going to keep going, but I'm going to mute myself for 1 second. I will return, I promise. Be very fast.
Okay.
Can you still hear me, Jack?
I can still hear you, yeah.
It's good to speak. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Really, really good. How are you? Are you enjoying the success of the book?
Yeah, I am. I mean, it's kind of it's sort of surreal, but at the same time, it's been so long coming. It's almost like, oh, the book's out there, but it's because you only talk about the book for so long. You know, now that it's out there, it's a bit okay. Right, well, let's move on to the next thing. You know, it's a long process. So yeah, absolutely. But it is weird. I mean, I was in Dublin and I was going around bookshops and actually seeing the books in the shops. It was a bit mad, really. It's just like, all right, okay.
Oh, really? That must be surreal.
Yeah.
Do you? So this is your first published book, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you kind of get your style from, or what, is it books that you've read? Is there a certain author that you like, or?
Do you know what? I actually, I do. I have to say, if ever you did read Adrian Mole, I don't know if you have, but I highly encourage that you do.
Okay, sure.
I'm hello.
I'm here. I'm sorry.
Oh yes.
Moved on to another podcast. I'm sorry.
I've taken over now, Faith.
Yes, you have. Oh my goodness, I can't wait to see what that is, and probably either edit it out or add it to bloopers and be like, when the host has to leave for 1 second.
I was just asking Jessica about the kind of books that she's read, or the kind of things that she's written before leading up to her first official professional publication.
This is your your debut novel, isn't it?
That's correct. Yes. Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
I didn't choose an easy road for the first.
Well, it's honestly, from what I've read, your writing is truly incredible, and I mean, I leapt for joy. Like, I was so, you charmed me. I haven't, like I mentioned, I think I had something I tweeted. I didn't grow up with much representation, or even knowing that I was, on the spectrum. So to see myself in an autistic, to relate as much as I did to Leon in the way that I have, was, I was overjoyed, because there are so many. I feel like there are so many people out there calling for authentic autistic representation, and for a time it didn't seem as if it was possible, because I mean, I'm sure you remember the debacle with Sia and music, and if you heard about that at all.
Oh yes, I've heard about that with Sia. Yeah,
that was a time, and I have thoughts on that. But I, it just seemed as if every time it was tried, it was either a Rain Man situation, or just or something that really leaned heavily into just stereotype territory, to eventually to the point where I was like, okay, I'm so tired of this, I'm going to go and create it myself, and Chaotic Idiots was born, and Edgar and Jacob were kind of created, at least on my end of things, for that reason.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I hear you very much when you talk about stereotype territory, and I think, if I'm being brutally honest, because again, I go back to the importance of it's a democracy. Luckily, we are in democracy,
right?
So
right.
Think of all those that are not.
Yes.
But I think that certainly my book, being a comedy. And the type of comedy that I've written, and certainly going a bit back also to what Jack asked me about, where the style comes from. I know that there are some people that might feel, oh, this is sort of, stereotypical in some respects, like, I'm certain things are quite heightened, if I can put it that way.
That makes sense.
And again, I feel I wrote this. I think the most important thing to know is that I wrote this with a blatant disregard for adult opinion. That was always the point. I feel that young kids, again, maybe I'm alone in my camp, and that's fair enough. I'll happily sit there with my lone flag. But I believe that young kids, we don't give them enough kudos and enough kind of respect for what they understand and how they can differentiate, at that age, say, from good versus bad, even having a flawed character that may not be the most morally responsible. I firmly believe that young kids, for example, reading Leon, will understand that while at times his behaviour is not acceptable, it can be rude, it can be offensive, there is an explanation behind that. It's not an excuse, but there is an explanation, and that he also has good aspects to his personality. And I also feel that on the subject of the rep in the book, I believe that young people will be able to understand that in the context of a comedy, there is a certain kind of sort of, as I said, that heightened kind of aspect to
leeway.
Jokes.
There's a little bit of leeway.
Exactly.
Right? Would you say that? Like, I feel like because you're not necessarily like okay, so I'm writing drama. Like with my show, I write drama, and there is some levity sometimes, and where the character, like, how'd you put it, Jack? You and I had a conversation one time about like your thoughts on like the way Edgar's state of being autistic was, I think, and it was like sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not, sometimes the things about like that are very autistically that character come out. And maybe even somebody could look at Edgar and be like, oh my goodness, that's such a stereotype. It's like, oh, it's another male autistic character. It's like, well, even I had my qualms about that, so I very much understand that. And I also agree with you on your take. I feel like sometimes with kids media, sometimes you need to simplify a concept, and then sometimes you need to get down into a little bit more complex. Because I certainly remember some of the media I grew up consuming was not necessarily so black and white, and as I've gotten older and examined those back, I would agree very much with that I comprehended much more than I think people gave me credit for.
And again, I think it's extremely important for, my huge motto is every child a reader. I firmly believe that every child should be a reader of something or some format, and I think that it's certainly a thing within the industry that a lot of people are very keen to sort of champion and say the phrase, and yes, every child a reader, and we've got to get kids reading, and but we have to take the word every very seriously and not lightly, and every child includes those kids that have conduct issues that are difficult, that are maybe antisocial. This is nothing to do, by the way, with any diagnosis. I'm just talking about kids in general. There are all kinds of kids out there, and kids that come from backgrounds where there is a lot of there could even be violence. There could be a lot of disruption. Kids that disrupt classes, that answer back, that are rude, that are defiant, that are all kinds of things for various reasons. By the way, it's not necessarily anything to do with a diagnosis. It could be a multitude of things. And I think that we have to bend the rules. We have to do things a bit differently, and I think that that's where I go back to the idea of representation should be quite varied and wide, and but not all kids who have an autism diagnosis come through it in an easy way or have even any support. There are just so many different personality types out there, and I think that we cannot forget maybe those population of anti-readers, as I like to call them, and they're not even reluctant readers. Reluctant readers will maybe read if it's the right format or the right subject that interests them, but the anti-reader just does not. Books do not figure on their radar at all. These are people, are kids, if we're talking about younger people, that really see books as the enemy, that see them as a source of anger and stress and frustration. And if we want to reach those readers, you have to play by different rules, I believe.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was one of those kids. Not that it was necessarily hard for me to read, but I had so many learning difficulties and learning disorders that were undiagnosed. I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was about 2. And it really kind of inhibited me with all the medications and things. I would not have done well in the classroom setting. I was taught at home, and and it because it was so severe on top of the medications and everything. So reading for me was the hardest challenge. I appreciate that you have that viewpoint, because I was one of those kids who reading anything was the hardest challenge for me, and quite difficult, just when it came to forming words and all of that. So I feel that immensely and appreciate that.
And even in the book, I know that some of the more controversial aspects of the book, and I know it's not for everyone, but there are tricky topics that are dealt with in the book, aside from neurodiversity, but also things like racism. There are some very touch and go passages in the book, but again, if we want to really reach readers and look at those important subjects that all young people and all people, everyone should be taking seriously. I really believe that when done right, and it's the aim, that humor can actually really make people see things in a different light. And but I see at the moment, for example, in the UK, I don't know about the US, you'd be better placed to tell me, but in the UK anyway, there's a huge amount of fantasy out there for kids, which is fantastic and amazing, top-notch fantasy, and an awful lot of sci-fi as well, which again, wonderful. I take my hat off to anyone that can write science fiction. I certainly cannot. But I find that contemporary and certainly comedy, you have a lot for younger ages, and then it sort of whittles off, and I think that's just such a shame. I really think that you can do so much with comedy, and it's so needed right now. I mean, the world is basically just falling in on itself, and kids just need a break, and I know that the fantasy serves an awful lot like sci-fi for escapism and world building and transporting you to different places. That's great, and it's very needed, but I also think that to be able to in some way look at the world differently, to spin it in a way with jokes and comedy, I also think is to be ignored at its peril in a way.
I mean, I could tell you that as far as TV shows are going, I mean, Disney's been at the head with Amphibia and Owl House, and those are Netflix did She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, and there were a couple of shows in the last few years out here that have tackled diversity and various subject matter, in children's cartoons, in a way that I think will in a way that at least to me was very clever. So I couldn't tell you much about the literature, because I haven't much looked at children's at like young readers' literature in a while, but as far as our cartoons go, there's been leaps and bounds made for sure. Then my next question that I had actually can go to you and Jack, because it'd be interesting. So you can talk about this from a writer's perspective, and maybe Jack, you can add something into this as well.
Sure.
But friendship and autism seem to be a bit of a hot topic in some autistic circles. And I think it's interesting that you have, you mentioned that Leon is surrounded by one of the subjects that I got from the book was that Leon has difficulty making connections. And you don't see too many stories about an autistic character surrounded by friends. When honestly, and maybe Jack, you can speak to this, some of us do have social lives, but you
I don't. No, I'm joking.
But you watch these TV shows like Atypical or The Good Doctor, and if you've seen Good Doctor, or just any of these shows, and you don't really, they're often isolated, and they maybe have one or two connections, but they really, I think the closest thing we got to that is like everything's going to be okay, and that that autistic lead did have some friends surrounding her, but a lot of the stories don't really. You okay?
I'm fine. Sorry.
You're just making sure. A lot of the stories don't really involve an autistic individual surrounded by friends. So how do you hope tackling a story about that and his group of friends who get into all kinds of young adult mischief together will maybe impact how society looks at those in the spectrum as far as the social aspect goes?
Well, I guess I could start that. You have both in the book, really. Leon is very much just a lone ranger. And to be honest, he really, again, it goes back to what I was saying previously about, is it his neurodiversity, or is it also just very much his character and his circumstance? Leon just doesn't have any interest or time for friends. He just is very happy in his own company. He's very happy with his lot in life. In the beginning of the book, he's just, got his situation down pat the way he likes it. He's got his very important hobby that's what really interests him. I think he's never really gone down the friendship route because either it's never presented itself, or just never, he's just been on other things and has never seen the value in having friends in a way, just doesn't see what he'd be missing out on, theoretically. And of course, during the book, there are moments where he's actually very dependent on the new friends that he makes, in many ways, particularly Tanya. There are moments where he says it himself, he has to see her, or he needs to talk to her. And then you have Lawrence. Lawrence is a very different person on that particular subject. He's someone who absolutely wants to make friends. If anything, it tends to be at his detriment, because he will, I would say, play that kind of card, and do everything he can to become friends and to be positive and be sociable, and that exists very much. I think it's a big mistake to assume that people with an autism diagnosis systematically don't want to have friends or to be isolated. I don't think that at all. I think, and certainly in my own experiences, it can be often in the other extreme, that it can be a bit too much. That sometimes you kind of rein it in a bit, or it can become kind of too intense at times. And again, in between it all depends on the different circumstances you've been faced with, and how you've managed to be helped through those different circumstances, I guess. So.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I would say that I probably fall more on the middle side of things. I mean, I've had friends come and go. I've had long-term friends for 7 to 9 years. I've had people for as short as 3. And so for me, it's interesting always exploring that aspect. I certainly was someone, I think, who never wanted to. I was never wanted to be by myself. So I always found it harder to relate to those stories where I would just see the same pattern of there's this autistic character, they're not surrounded by too many people, they maybe have one connection, and I was like, well, I'm like, I don't relate to that, but like that was just my experience, because I was always the kid who longed for it. So it is interesting just exploring that avenue for sure. Did you want to add something? Jack?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Definitely. It's interesting because, yes, I get that whole stereotype of the loner, and that is definitely something that, they're definitely out there. I would say that I'm a little bit of a loner. I do have quite a lot of friends. I have a good social circle. I have a limit, though. I do definitely want to be on my own quite a lot. But I also have some friends who are also autistic, and they are some of the funniest and some of the most caring and some of the most charismatic and creative people I've ever known. And they have friends, and they form very solid relationships. So, and not one is the same as well. I've got one that's very outgoing and very very hyperactive. Has a lot of passions. I've got one that's quite reclusive, but has also this very calm nature about them that people really like to be around. And that's my viewpoint. And I think they're definitely out there. They're very varied, and that's what makes them fascinating and wonderful.
Yeah, I'm similar too. I had many. It's interesting, that you mentioned that, Jack, because it was mostly before I knew I was on the spectrum. it was always those who fell on the autism spectrum, or I have some friends who have ADHD who I get along with, really well, and I understand them. It was always the best relationships I think I ever had, friendship-wise, was definitely with those who fell into the spectrum. Not to the same, I hate to use the word functioning, but not to the same, I think, vocal level as me. But they definitely, they were able to, they were verbal similarly enough to the point where we could have a one-on-one conversation. And they were often the people who, who would just make me smile and laugh the hardest. And so, I'm probably similar to you in that way.
Oh, yeah.
And I also do get it about the whole, wanting, we do require so much alone time, but I feel like there is a period of time where we're like, okay, can we go out and do something?
Yeah, a lot of that is because of routine, and that's definitely something that Asparagus Bunch handles amazingly, is that Leon has a lot of routines, especially with his food.
I related to that so heavily.
Yeah, I relate to that quite a lot, and I think that is definitely something that is definitely a recurring symptom of autism, and and it's explored very well in this book, and it's something that I see in every autistic person in real life, and also every fictional character.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I was curious. For either of you, Jessica mainly can probably answer this, but maybe you can talk about this from an actor's standpoint, Jack. What are your thoughts about the call for diversification of autistic-led stories, and how do you hope that Asparagus Bunch can help to pave the way for more authentically autistic voices in the world of books and media?
Well, it kind of, the question, you asked a really great question to Jack at the beginning, which she spoke about typecasting in a way, and again, I'll be like my book and be controversial, as I tend to always be, but I think that it would be lovely in general to, in order, I think, for better, not just better mightn't be the right word, but more diversification within this sort of subject and many others, is for a bit more nuance at times. I know very honestly that a lot of people will just blacklist my book because I may be a mother of a child with an autism spectrum disorder, but that sort of cancels me out, that I have not a viewpoint, that I don't have a lived experience, that I don't have any I just can't, I'm not fit to tell that story, and that's fully understand. I can understand why people may think that, and I can fully respect that, but I think at times, sometimes a little bit of nuance on those subjects, I feel that there's a lot that could be said maybe about somebody who, for example, do I feel that neurodivergent authors, should they only ever write about neurodivergent characters?
Hello, welcome back to Coffee Break. I am interviewing Jessica Scott Whyte, author of The Asparagus Bunch, and actor and incredible actor extraordinaire Jack Moorby, who narrates said book, The Asparagus Bunch. And we are going to jump back into our questions. So, like I was said in our last segment, Jessica, what were your thoughts about the call for diversification of autistic-led stories, and how do you hope that the Asparagus Bunch can pave the way for those authentic autistic voices?
I think that certainly I would put myself forward as an advocate for diversification. However, I know that my opinion mightn't necessarily be aligned with popular opinion. I feel that, going back to a question that you had asked Jack earlier on in the conversation about how important it is to have correct representation, as in autistic voices, perhaps, for when you are writing about the subject of autism, or indeed acting a role. I do fully agree that it is better to be as close in that pairing as possible. However, for the writing side of things, where I think diversification could possibly happen, and I'd like to see happen in more of a 360 way, is to see a little bit of nuance there, and to not, I feel like the publishing industry is very much going down this road now where, and this is not just with regards to neurodiversity, but it really is, if this is your story to tell, well, you're sort of in that box, and that's it, and you can't really necessarily deviate from that box. And again, we must always ask ourselves why we are writing certain stories, how well positioned we are to be able to tell those stories. But I think that there should be at times a bit more nuance. For example, is a lived experience such as my own a valid one or not? I'm of the opinion yes. Others may not think that, but I think that that is something that I feel is important. And I also feel people who are neurodiverse, should they only ever write about neurodiverse characters? I don't personally think so. I feel that someone who's neurodiverse could absolutely write from the point of view of someone who's neurotypical, or certainly have neurotypical characters in their work. I think that really writing, for me, at the end of the day, it's an observation game, and the best writers out there, obviously it is a craft, but it's also the observations, what the writer is able to take in around them and put that on the page and develop that. And do I feel that people who as I said, someone who is autistic cannot observe different things around them and bring something to the page apart from their own unique experience? No, I think that there could be more sort of openness and nuance into what the publishing industry allows, in inverted commas, people to write and to not write. Again, in the right way and taking the right measures, of course. So yeah, that would be kind of what I said before. I probably turned it a different way, but
yeah, that makes sense. Entirely, and I agree with you. Even I only started writing my own authentic neurodivergent characters probably as far as my first would probably be 2018, but before that I was writing all kinds of characters who would be considered more neurotypical. So I definitely feel that I've been on both sides, and I think now that I'm just stepping into who I am in regards to my neurodivergent voice, I think I'm leaning into that, but I don't think I necessarily want to pigeonhole myself as just a neurodivergent writer.
And I also think that, again, that in itself has a richness to it. I mean, again, and I talk about this in a very broad sense. For example, if someone is gay, for example, should they only be allowed to write about gay characters? No, I don't believe that at all. I believe that while, of course, again, depending on the story you're telling, and really the sort of the drive behind it, I can fully understand why some people might say, well, have you lived this experience? Do you know what that's like? But for example, you may have a parent who is gay, you may have a sister or brother who is gay, you may yourself have questioned things about your sexuality, but does that mean it's an absolute no-go? These are things that I hope that the publishing industry will somehow, I think, revisit, because at the moment it's extremely regulated. It's the minute someone sort of is putting out a work, whether it's for children or even adults, straight away it's almost nearly more important to understand the author's connection to the story.
Right.
And I think it's like anything in extremes is never a good thing. Does it mean you should never take any, and you should let it be a free-for-all and let anyone put anything out there? No. Should you take an interest in maybe the author's background and their connection to the story and the drive behind the story? Absolutely. Should you be wary of someone who's coming at a subject from absolutely nowhere, and not only that, but the work itself doesn't really stand up to maybe being a quality product? Naturally, yes, you have to ask those questions, but and I also think it's counterproductive for so many different writers out there that may be from minority backgrounds, for example. I would love to read more widely from authors from all kinds of backgrounds, but maybe that's just me. I'm extremely open-minded, and I just feel, if someone's taken the time, it's just such a laborious thing to write a book. Having been there myself, it is one of the most difficult things I've ever done. And for someone to put that much work and that much effort and that much devotion into something, and really carry it through, I think that's a voice at least worth considering. Whether or not it becomes a bestseller, that's always something else. But
I agree 100%, and you're right. You're right on all accounts. This next question is sort of for the both of you. And the first portion is maybe you can answer this better, Jessica. But what do you hope people will take away by listening and reading the story of Leon, his mother, and the things that he gets up to with the friends that he makes throughout the story?
Sure, that's such a lovely question. An emotional question, funnily enough, because it is absolutely the thing that it drives you to write any story. It's something you're trying to say, and you know what? Here it is in a nutshell. If there was one thing I would like people to understand about this book, it is not a book about neurodiversity. It is not. It happens to have a cast of neurodiverse characters, absolutely. Does the subject of neurodiversity feature heavily in the book? Yes, it does. But for me, this is a book about control. The main theme of the whole book is control, and not just through the lens of someone who is neurodiverse. Not at all. It looks and examines what control we have in our lives, what it's like when what we think we have control over, what we may or may not have control over, and how we react when suddenly what we have some sort of control over is taken away from us very quickly. And really, for me, the theme of control goes through the entire book, and it is told through a partial cast of neurodiverse characters, which is, again, I feel an important step forward in that absolutely we need books about there maybe totally addressing autism or dyslexia, etc., ADHD and what have you. But I feel it's important in evolving in the representation as well, that it can just so happen, it can just be the case that the characters happen to be neurodiverse, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a book just about exploring these particular conditions or diagnosis. So yeah, I wrote this book actually at a time, it was just before the first lockdown in the UK, or in Europe I should say. I'm based in Paris, so it was at the very beginning of the first wave of lockdown, and already, irrespective of COVID, I was in a very bad place. I had a lot of anger issues, which might sound kind of unusual to hear. A lot of, we talk maybe about mental health issues and depression and things like that, but I had a lot of issues with anger, and for various reasons, things that were just going wrong in my life, and again, very much linked to control. About in particular, you sort of have two issues with control. You have sort of control over the everyday, and that like you don't slip and fall down the stairs and break a bone and all that. But then you also have issues with control where people can come into your life and actively meddle with your life and make decisions that then impact your life in a negative way. And I was going through quite a bit of that at the time, which was extremely difficult. And then lockdown hit, and I just absolutely, I completely spiraled in a very negative way, and I was really struggling, hugely struggling, and I was very angry. Just the anger, it was very, very difficult at that time. And so when it was my mum, God, bless her, she's just was fantastic through the whole process, and she just kept saying to me, would you not just try and keep writing? Come on, just, it doesn't matter about what you write, just try and write. And she sent me once, during lockdown, she sent me a little package with just a notebook in it, but a beautiful notebook in the post, and said to me, in a little note, she just said, for when you get the courage to get back into the writing, because she knew I'd always written, it was always a passion of mine. And so I eventually did, through that little encouragement, get back on the writing kind of routine, and I came up with this idea for Leon, because at the time I was dealing with the diagnosis of my own child. It was sort of happening around that time as well. Right. And so anyway, long story short, not to bother you with all that, is it really a lot of Leon's struggles with things that happen in his life and how he deals with them, and the unfairness, the downright unfairness at certain points in the book certainly are also very much echoed in what I was going through at the time. And so that's what I would love for people to take away. I would love for maybe kids to read it and say, like it is said towards the end of the book, you know, we think we have control over most things in our lives. Technology is a great way of helping us believe that, you know, you can order this and you can have that and you can buy this and all that. And then all of a sudden when life has a very, you know, sneaky way of coming up behind you and just throwing everything kind of, you know, under the bus. And you know, especially with what's been going on in the world and what is going on in the world, I would hate to be 11 right now. I mean that very sincerely. It's an awful thing to say, but it is just, God, like, I mean, no thank you. And it's awful. And I think kids have just got so much in the way of anxiety and just the bleakness of the future, how it seems right now, and certainly how things are being portrayed. And the unfairness of it all, because a lot of it is nothing to do with them, and it's other people's actions and generations before, you know, when it's like climate change, wars and whatnot, social unrest. And they are having to face all that. And so this book is really also looking at, you know, about that whole injustice of life and how you might manage to kind of get around that in some way.
Right. Absolutely. That makes sense.
Very long-winded answer. I'm sorry, but I hope it was a full one.
No, it was good. No, it was good for you to go on.
How do I follow that up?
The second part of the question was more aimed towards you, Jack, and it was what is the hope as far as neurodiversity, inclusion, and advocacy is concerned for the story that you're hoping readers might gain by indulging in it, from your perspective?
I hope that people, something I really hope people take away from that point of view is that that it's a wonderful story about not just acceptance but self-acceptance. One thing I love about the book is that Leon is in denial, and I like that part of his arc is that he does accept it, because his mother accepts his autism, his friends accept it, it's just him that doesn't. And I love that in the end it is something that he comes to terms with and he's comfortable with. And that's something I really want. I also want people to take away that neurodivergent people can be some of the most empathetic people out there. I want that myth to be debunked.
Yes,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Yes,
I agree with you. I agree with you entirely.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is something that I see that is pervaded so much, you know, throughout I don't know, throughout the autism community. I hear that a lot.
Yeah, I hear it a lot as well.
All the time, and I'm like, what, you know, like why? What, like why is it? Where does that come from? And why is it so pervasive when really there are actually two sides to that coin? I would consider myself hyper empathetic and incredibly like I am an empath, and I would feel as if because of my autism I'm doubly empathetic, and so I feel what people tend to feel incredibly and strongly, and so whereas maybe somebody has lower empathy, but it doesn't mean that they don't have empathy. It just might mean that they might feel what you feel a little bit differently. It could mean that. It could just mean that they don't have enough to go on just yet. But yeah, that's one thing that I absolutely adored about this book, was that it was such a compelling story of not just accepting others but accepting yourself. I definitely think that's important for children, whether they're neurodiverse or 100%.
not, is to have that level of self-acceptance, as they grow up and work out who they are.
100%. And I feel like with him, if we can bring in like like the just briefly the mention of like I feel like Sesame Street adding Julia and Troy Kotzer and having those kinds of conversations, at least as far as children's programming goes, is the most inclusive I think I've ever seen of that side of things as far as visual programming goes. I would definitely love to see that in more books as well.
Yeah.
The next question was, we've been speaking a lot on stereotypes, and I think I mentioned earlier in our talk that one complaint that I often hear in autistic circles is that so many of these autistic characters that are in the modern media tend to be male. They lean into, like you mentioned, the old stereotypes of the Rain Man savant, or they border on, I hear a lot of autistics talk about infantilization. Was there any worry about when writing Leon that people might look at him in the same light as they did Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because, as I think we'd spoken about briefly at a previous question, writing a comedy means, well, certainly again, hand on heart, it was intentional. I mean, you don't spend that long writing a book and not, decide exactly what you're doing. I knew that I really wanted to really get under the skin in many ways of, yes, a lot of the I would say more general or generic kind of symptoms, or characteristics I should say, and explore those, and of course through comedy, as I previously mentioned, it tends to lead at times to a sort of a heightened kind of portrayal, but it's interesting. I have met already, before I'd even written the book, I had met many Leons through being a parent of a child who goes to special group sessions and has a great accompaniment, as I say, for their autism, and I have met many a Leon and many a Lawrence. Dare I say it, I live with the Leons. So I'm sorry, of course, I think I do appreciate that might not be everyone's experience, or indeed maybe people just feel that that's something that's too overseen, and again, perfectly fine, I'm okay with that, but I love when it comes to comedy, I always get drawn to those sorts of comedies, in particular if we're talking about TV and film or TV. Like, I give an example, one of my all-time favourite comedies is Frasier. Like, I love Frasier. And it's totally kind of over the top. It is over the top. I mean, these are two guys that are just, arrogant and sort of pretentious within an inch of their lives. They're like, it's total stereotype. But it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I'm not saying I'm on that level. Please do not take that for what I'm saying. But I absolutely love that. And another example, again, you may not know it so much, Faith, but there's a really brilliant series in the UK that did extremely well, and it's called The In-Betweeners. And The In-Betweeners,
I feel like I've heard of that. Yeah,
you should get on that.
I watch so much. Like, I grew up on so much BBC stuff. Like, I grew up on Merlin. I grew up on Robin Hood. I grew up on Downton Abbey. I've indulged recently in, like I mentioned in last session, There She Goes, or other Doctor Who. Like, it would not be wrong to say that I'm often am seeking quite a few shows from over there, more so than often the shows that are here right now. I'm very open. I'm open to all opinions, really, including people just saying, I hate your book. Well, always good to give specifics, but if they come to me and say, look, I found this just completely like too much of a stereotypical portrayal, people are welcome to think that way. However, I stand very much by the fact that these characters I've met many of and known intimately well, and as I said, I have very personal experience with these characters. I didn't just pluck them out of nowhere, and that has to be respected. At least that's my view on it.
whether people want to share that or not, that's their business, and I'm respectful of that.
That makes sense. That makes entirely a lot of sense. And then these last two questions are for Jack, and I do have a bonus question, but these last two ones are aimed at Jack. In the first part of the interview, I had asked you if you felt being neurodiverse pigeonholed you a bit in regards to gigs. And if this gets a little too personal, again, just not the answer.
Sure.
But do you think that maybe neurodiverse actors and actresses fear not being seen as capable in the industry because being neurodiverse still has such a stigma? And how can maybe being open about it, not to like the degree of like you talk about all your struggles and all the things you go through, but like being open about it maybe can help change the conversation? Or do you think it might hinder things even further?
I don't think it should hinder things. I don't, and I don't think it ever has. Don't think it ever will. If anything, neurodivergence, it depends on the person, but it can be a strength, and I think it has been a strength for me because I get very obsessive when I have a part because I just want to do good. And that's something I've always been open about, was that I get obsessive and I make it a habit working on a character or a play. I don't think it should hinder me. I do get what you're saying, that there is that whole stigma. But I think we live in a different world now. I think we live in a world that is desperately seeking more neurodiverse people, because some neurodiverse people throughout history have been who either are neurodiverse or allegedly neurodiverse have gone on to do incredible things. Like Jessica listed quite a few in the book. One of my favourites is Mozart, who does not have a formal diagnosis, but there are so many signs pointing to the fact that he could have been. Same with Walt Disney and Albert Einstein.
There are even talks and mentions, I think, that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's teacher, I believe, who he based Sherlock off of, could have even been. The things that and that can be a little bit controversial. I know that it's been that the idea of Sherlock being autistic in any way has been a very controversial idea, particularly over there. I remember a few years back hearing some things, but like even the person who he based Sherlock off of, the way that Sherlock talks and rambles off those things, just have a very almost, and I hate to use autistic savant only because of how rare that can be, but very much Sherlock is a genius savant. He has the savant, a style to him. You know what I mean? So I feel like that's very true. You have to think if you to have such a genius level of intelligence, particularly when it comes to the mathematical minds that is in musicians, they had to have been neurodivergent in some form or fashion, and the science just wasn't there to tell them that.
I just hope that the media doesn't get stuck portraying autistic people in a certain way, because I think how a lot of autistic people get portrayed now in media is that they are super intelligent. Like that, it's almost like it's a superpower.
And then there's you and me.
And then there's me going, that's not how it works. Well, not all the time.
That's not how the Force works.
But while yes, there are autistic people who do see the world like that and do think like that, it's not very common.
And it's not necessarily safe, I think, to pigeonhole us as like the socially inept, we have our social cues and stuff, and that all what Colin comes back to, you know, what I talk about when I talk about stereotypes. I don't think I necessarily mean like your experiences, but I think when we think of why they're a stereotype, it's like, oh, the genius savant, oh, the socially inept. When we have our moments where we go, I don't understand what you're saying, but I'm going to nod my head. And it's more like, what were they meaning, and how does this work, versus how they play it out. And then the other question was, and it kind of ties into this a little bit, how do you feel Leon compares, in your opinion, Jack, to other characters that maybe you've seen in media, from like an acting standpoint?
Yeah, you mean other characters who
maybe
are on the spectrum or allegedly on the spectrum?
Either, or if they appear to, if they have very autistic traits, like...
Yeah.
Or, better question, why do you think most autistics tend to relate to characters who aren't necessarily said to be on the spectrum versus the ones who are?
That's a really good question. I think there are a number of I think autistic people see... They tend to see a lot of themselves in some people, in just certain qualities that neurotypical people have. Some autistic people mask, which means that you're masking, meaning kind of what it says on the tin, that you learn a certain way of behaviour just to fit in. That could be a reason. But yeah, or maybe autistic people are not so much masking. I think maybe they identify with some neurotypical people because they have something, a certain quality that they want, or they want to be more like them. It's not entirely unlike how I feel neurotypical people think, because I think everyone identifies with people and sees an aspect to someone else and thinks, oh, I want to be a bit more like that. I don't think it's just autistic people. But yeah, a lot of it is that a lot of autistic people have neurodiverse people have neurotypical role models, because they just want to be either more like them, or they have
less like ourselves.
Perhaps, yeah. That could be another reason, that they don't want this, they want that.
That makes sense. I mean, most of our lives, sometimes by our neurotypical peers, we're told if you be more like this, then you'll be accepted into society, and our quirks and our traits are stimming, are the things that we just unconsciously do in a conversation. You know, I mean, I can count the number of times that you and I have probably chatted on call, and have been like, and just like we're going back and forth and talking over each other, and we're like, this is fine, and this is normal, this is an autistic conversation. and we're not getting mad at each other, because we're like, yeah, I would do that too, and you know, and we try to be respectful. We try to, you know, you talk, I talk. It's like, who talks first? kind of thing. But I see what you mean, and I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. I was just saying that was a really good question.
Yeah. And the last one is I'll throw it back to the both of you, and this will be our final question. Is we've talked a lot about some of the difficulties of crafting representation, and there are lots of obstacles as we've seen. But what have been some of the joys of the process, and how have they lifted you up by giving you the space to bring what is authentically a part of yourselves to the project?
Jack, do you want to take that first, or shall I?
You're welcome to, if you're ready to go.
Well, I guess in my sort of situation, absolutely. One of the the joys for me was writing the story again, that very much in the detail of so many examples that are taken from my own life and day-to-day relationship with my own child, through obviously Caroline, and sort of that constant struggle of, dare I say it, that tendency to overprotect, to want to really, sort of pander to because you lock in so quickly with how your child is, and all the sort of the buttons and the ones not to push on what day, and etc., and you really want to help and assist. And then there is also that struggle of it's still important that you have to sometimes take a step back and not be too overly protective too. I mean, these are just my own experiences again, and so definitely that was absolutely a real joy, but again at times extremely challenging to write, because some of those scenes, I mean, I could write them in minutes. It was just literally just all coming out very, very fluidly, because it was so familiar, really so familiar. And I did obviously also really enjoy researching all the suites, which took an awful lot of time. And for the second book, because I'm obviously I'm writing a sequel, there's an awful lot more.
I was about to ask.
Yeah.
I was about to ask. There is a question, and I wasn't sure if we had time for it. But I was going to ask you if you had plans. To continue with more stories, either about Leon and his friends, or other characters of similar neurodiverse backgrounds.
There's a sequel to the book. I signed a 2-book deal contract back when I signed with Welbeck, and so the sequel will be coming out. I believe it's in May of 2023. So
cool.
I'm knee deep in that, and it is a year down the line from where we leave off. Leon is 14. Wow. And the sequel is called From Blackpool with Love, and very, very sentimental.
I'm very excited to jump on this series, and just see where it goes and takes off.
I'm not lying. I mean, but now that I've seen Jack in action, or heard Jack in action, if I could say that, it's very difficult not to write certain things and think, I wonder how Jack would manage that one.
Yes.
I just threw that curveball in.
I was the same way. Whenever he came on board as Edgar, and he brought, and I've told Jack this, I was like, oh my gosh, can I just tell you that you've brought, there are times where that character is so endearing, and he's able to just bring that out, and then he's also able to make the character scarily commanding, and so stern and so serious, both within the snap of a finger. It's amazing what he can do. Just give him the right material, and something that's written really well, as your story is completely written really, really well. And I think that he can bring anything to life, really.
Oh, indeed.
Stop.
So anyway, just to finish on that anyway about the suites, so all the research, and again, I do also know, and I know of many autistic people who don't necessarily have this. I mean, they will maybe be quite obsessive about certain things. They may not have, let's say, a really intensive hobby. I mean, it falls differently for different people. But in my household, that's a very big part of life, a hugely big part of our lives, and it's just so for me, again, I'm well, I would say, finely tuned into all of that in many respects. So that was another part of a very enjoyable aspect of the writing process.
Wonderful. Jack?
I've really, really enjoyed identifying with things, because I've quite a lot of my actor training and my work as an actor has been identifying with things. I do identify with a lot of things that I relate with characters. There are quite a lot of things that I don't identify with. but I need to find a way to bring myself to that. It's been delightful to find things that I relate to, and so many things that I hear about, that I hear come up in the conversations about autism, come up in the book. That's just been a huge delight, and it's been a lot of fun, and
Thank you.
Although
Jack, should we let Faith in after all of this, because she hasn't read the book yet, that there is a Doctor Who reference in the book?
Yeah, there is a Doctor Who reference that I really enjoyed. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
No.
In fact, funny story. When I was doing the prep, and I read, and I was doing my notes in the text, there was Dr. Snot's voice was described as being surprisingly deep, and I based the voice on an actor called Tom Baker, who and then later on, there was a direct reference, not just to Doctor Who, but to Tom Baker.
Oh, that's
in a chapter with Dr. Snot.
That's very funny and
which
very cool.
what a coincidence.
But
And your favorite Doctor.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say, come on, Faith, we'll have to test you now very quickly, because it's in relation to a particular item of confectionery. So you Whovian.
It's a jelly baby, isn't it?
I see. Well, there we go.
Unfortunately, I have been schooled on your sweets. I actually there is an import store where I am located, and I bought myself Jammy Dodgers one day, and I have fallen in love with them. And they're like all the candies you described in your book, Jessica, were like at that at that store. So there were Mars bars, and I saw the Cadbury like cream eggs, and I was like, oh, I know what that is, and like the like everything you described. I was like, oh yes, this and this and this and this. And I'm like, I wish I had all the money in the world to buy it, because like I'm just a sucker for stuff from over there. Like that's very much like I will eat anything that is like not, if it's from Japan or if it's from the UK, I will take it. I want to try it. I want to at least try it.
Well, I'm very impressed that you were able to answer that so quickly. So, in fairness, I doff my hat to you.
Well, I can thank Jack for that, because I recently got in. I was sick one day. I got into Doctor Who, and he recommended the Fourth Doctor. He talked about it, and I had just come off of like Tenet at the time, and I was like, I'm so charmed. Like I've watched. The only Tom Baker thing I think I've seen is the Shada, the Lost episode.
Oh,
Shada,
yeah.
that was reanimated.
Douglas Adams, yeah.
Yeah. So that one's close, and I plan to get the DVDs at some point.
Yeah, in the sequel, there's going to be another Doc, and I'm going to base the voice on Sylvester McCoy. No, I'm joking.
No, you're going to do your best Tennant impression.
Well, I tell you what, Jack, I'll give you something to stress about now for the next, I don't know how many months, but you might need to imagine Lawrence in maybe some capacity, possibly with the Queen's voice. So I'm just putting that out there to you.
I cannot wait. Yes, Lawrence.
Lawrence
man,
is going to take a liking to Her Madge for a specific occasion. I'm not saying any more.
I am. This is the first thing I've heard about the sequel. I'm so excited. I'm really excited.
I'm excited to read into like listen to this, and I want to thank you both so much for finding time out of, I'm sure, your crazy, insane lives to even do this with me. You were both a delight. It's always a delight to talk to you, Jack. It was amazing to get to speak with you, Jessica.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions and your openness. Yeah, thank you.
I'm so glad too, and I look forward to definitely sharing this and editing this, and definitely putting it out there. It will be available on Spotify, and an Anchor, and possibly my YouTube channel as well, so that it's more accessible to a wide variety of people. Because apparently I can't put that on my Instagram as I wanted to, but it will be out there to listen to shortly. So once again, this has been Coffee Break. Thank you so much, everyone who's listened. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
And why don't you just go ahead and plug your social medias so where people can like follow you and where they can even get the book.
Well, I'm not so much on social media, probably only Instagram at the moment, because social media is quite a labour-intensive thing, but it is on Instagram, Jess Scott Whyte, and the book is available at the Big River Place, as they like to say, and throughout the UK and Ireland and Australia and New Zealand, for those of you in those respective territories.
All right, that works.
Yeah.
Jack?
Yeah, well, my social media, on Instagram, I'm just Jack Moorby. Took me ages to think of that username. And then on Twitter, I am Jack_Moorby. And yeah, pick up the Asparagus Bunch in bookstores, and if you want to listen to the audiobook, it is on Audible.
Yeah, audible.com. Definitely go and check that out. And you can follow me, of course, on my socials. My Twitter is Chaotic Idiots Podcast. And you can also find me on Instagram as Faith Jacobs Official VA. So once again, thank you, Jack, and thank you, Jessica. And this is Faith Jacobs signing off.